Ladies and gentlemen, it's an enormous privilege to welcome Andre Leon Talley to the Oxford Union tonight. Andre Leon Talley is a former editor-at-large of Vogue and trustee of the Savannah College of Art and Design. Having started work at Andy Warhol's Interview in 1975, he became Vogue's fashion news editor only a few years later. Andre personifies style and is one of the most authoritative voices in the industry today. His counsel is even frequently sought by the most fashionable figures in the world, including the Obama family. A former judge on America's Next Top Model, Andre is one of the most popular and charismatic figures on television, and it truly is a great pleasure for me to ask you to join me in a round of applause to welcome him to the stage here tonight.
Thank you, Maria Riumin, for that wonderful introduction. I'd like to thank especially Maria and her committee for this great honor to be here. I'd like to thank Kai, Rishon, Paulina, and the Madame Bursa. There was a lady, the Bursa, what's her name? We just call her. Oh, Madame Bursa. So I spent a wonderful afternoon with them, and I'd really like to thank you. This is a great honor for me to be here. I'll try not to bore you. I'd also like to introduce some of my special friends who've come across the pond to be with me tonight. One, would you please stand up as I call your name, is Kim Cole-Moore from Illinois, who is a mother, a painter, and a tennis paddle champion. And then I'd like to introduce Danny Filson, the Vice President of SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, and Glenn Wallace, another Vice President of SCAD. And this illustrious lady, Paula Wallace, please stand up, is the founder and president of Savannah College of Art and Design. She and her family founded this beautiful school in Savannah, Georgia, an art school. If you ever want to go and do a master's degree, it's a perfect place to study. Anything you practically want to study, including weaving and pottery and drama and everything. And Paula and I are great friends, and she is one of the reasons that I feel that I can come and talk to you, because I spent a great deal of time at the Savannah College of Art and Design, so it's very much a part of my life. I think a part of most of my life there is perfect. I want to start with the idea to tell you a bit of who I am. Anyone in this room didn't just pop out of nowhere. You are what you become is what you became from where you came from. So if you have a mother, a father, sister, brother, an aunt, a great aunt, an uncle, anyone in your family, or a teacher or a mentor that you've looked up to that's instilled in you something to go forward and to achieve your dreams, that is a very important person. I happen to have been lucky in my life to have two women who are responsible for the person you see here tonight, Andre Leon Talley. The lady on the left is my grandmother. Her name was Benny Frances Davis. I grew up in her house. At one point, we were 3 people in this house. It was my grandmother and her mother, my great-grandmother, China. This is the most perfect place that I can ever remember being in as a child. My grandmother was a maid at a university called Duke University for 50 years. She cleaned dormitory rooms. But on the weekends, we had the most wonderful life built around church. We had nothing, but we had everything because we had love. I had unconditional love, my grandmother. I learned the core values, and I learned style from my grandmother. Actually, I owe my grandmother a great deal about style. We didn't talk about style. For me, she was style. When I was very young, my grandmother, one of the great things she used to do was sit down at night and comb her hair. She had very beautiful hair. And when I was very, very young, the hair was lavender and sometimes periwinkle blue. So I thought that God had given my grandmother a special gift. She had, lavender hair, and sometimes it was lavender and sometimes it was periwinkle blue. I never questioned it. I just thought this is special. Of course, when I grew up, I realized that she was having her hair blue rinsed at the hairdresser. And the lady on the right, Diana Vreeland, had a friend named Lady Mendel, Elsa de Wolf, who was one of the great American decorators and a great woman who lived in Versailles. And she was also a big advocate of periwinkle and lavender blue rinsed hair when your hair turned white. My grandmother was extraordinary. I remember as a child that she could get up in the morning, the sun wasn't up, and she might be in her wrapper and nightgown, and I remember her going out into the yard and chopping wood to put wood on the fire, the wood-burning stove. She would go to work, come home at 3 o'clock, and from 3 o'clock on until dinner, she was doing everything in the house. We had an impeccable house, beautiful white sheets, which I think is the ultimate luxury that I learned from my grandmother. She ironed the sheets, she ironed the towels, she did the washing, she did everything in the house. And in the summertime, when it was warm, we had a huge black pot outside under an apple tree. And my great-grandmother, China, had a huge stick, and we would put fires into this black pot, and the white sheets would be boiled. The sheets were actually cooked and boiled, and they were being washed in this heat. And then they were hung out to dry on these beautiful clotheslines that ran the whole length of the backyard. And I will never forget running through these fresh sheets that had been washed into this boiling water, and the smell of sheets drying in the open air is a smell that I still lingers with me in my mind. It's a smell that I wish I could bottle to make a perfume. I would be rich, because the smell of fresh white sheets drying in the open air, you don't get that today. Everyone's at the laundromat. I've seen my grandmother, and my great-grandmother decapitate chickens for dinner. I've seen my grandmother skin a squirrel, which I did not eat. And I saw my grandmother do so many things like a pioneer woman. And towards the middle of her life, her husband fell dead of a heart attack on a city street one day. And to make the comparison with my grandmother, Mrs. Vreeland also, at a certain point, lost her husband, although she loved him, to cancer. Both of these women were women who survived on their own. They were independent, and the thing that mattered to them most was work. Work and a sense of the values of what life should be. When I was a teenager, my grandmother had an extra room, and she chose the color pink. It was Schiaparelli pink. She didn't know it was Schiaparelli pink, nor did I, but she chose pink, and I had this room, and I could go in the room and do whatever I wanted. So I would go in the room and just read Vogue. I think I was reading Vogue at the age of 9. I probably was not reading it. I was probably just looking at the photographs. But I can say that Vogue was the thing. I was not outside playing. I was not out shooting hoops. I was not out playing football. I was sitting alone in my special room, reading the pages of Vogue. So I knew who Diana Vreeland was when I finally met her. I also would tear the pages out carefully and thumbtack them on the wall. So my whole special room was wallpapered with nothing but images of Vogue, my favorite pictures, people, the society people, the fashion shoots, and everything. So as I was in high school, every Sunday I would go across town to Duke University to a magazine and newspaper stand and buy Vogue. In those days, it came out twice a month. Under Mrs. Vreeland's era, it was published twice a month. Can you imagine? And little did I think how naive I was. I could have subscribed to it. But one of the joys was going from church across the railroad track to the Duke campus to buy Vogue and to buy the New York Times and any other magazine I could get my hand on. So my whole universe and imagination was peopled through the pages of Vogue, Diana Vreeland's Vogue. And of course I had a photograph of her on the wall as well. It was an amazing thing because in my family, I was the only child, and I lived with my grandmother, and she never questioned anything I wanted to do. As long as I was reading, listening to music, looking at Julia Child, making a chicken. I didn't watch Julia Child and learn how to cook. I looked at Julia Child because she said bon appetit, and I loved the way it sounded. So, of course, my major was French in high school. I went to college to major in French. I wanted to be a French teacher. I went to Brown University. I got a scholarship to go to Brown University. And in 1974, 75, my friends were encouraging me to go to New York City. And the one person I wanted to meet was Diana Vreeland. To get to meet Diana Vreeland at the Metropolitan Museum, she was no longer at Vogue, you had to have a letter of introduction. So someone managed to get me a letter of introduction, a friend of mine whose father was president of a hosiery company, to Mrs. Vreeland's offices in the Metropolitan Museum. I go into the museum, and I do not meet Mrs. Vreeland the first day. And suddenly, the second or third day, someone has given me a project. It was her exhibit called Romantic and Hollywood Glamorous Design. And it was a swimsuit made out of a metal disc that had been found in a box from Mrs. Vreeland in Hollywood. And one of the curators said, please take this and assemble it and put it on a mannequin, and Mrs. Vreeland will come by and she will give you her point of view about it. I had never done anything like this before. What was I supposed to do with this mess of disc in a box? So they gave me a pair of pliers, and I sort of, did a surrealist assemblage of this swimsuit. I think it was worn in a movie called The Prodigal Son by Lana Turner. And Mrs. Vreeland walks through the museum at 1:30, and her entrance is full of pageantry. She walks on her toes, the heels never hit the floor. When Mrs. Vreeland is upstairs at the entrance of the Metropolitan Museum, they call downstairs and they say Mrs. Vreeland is on her way. So everyone's standing sentry duty to see Madame Vreeland make her entrance into her office. So I was hiding behind a column because I had seen her at parties, but I'd never been in her office. So that day I was hiding behind a column where this swimsuit was to see her reaction. And she squinted. She wasn't, she didn't make any emotion. She just kept walking. And 2 minutes later, someone came from her office and said, Mrs. Vreeland will see you now. And I walked into Mrs. Vreeland's office. She sat me down and she said, now, what is your name? And I said, Andre. And I could see, because she wrote big on yellow legal pads, she wrote my name, Andre, and then she put / the helper. And then she stood up, and then she walked around her desk, and she says, now you will stay by my side for the rest of this show. You will never leave my side. And Mrs. Vreeland spoke in dramatic language. Sometimes it didn't make sense what she said, but you had to figure it out. But that was my entree into this world of Diana Vreeland and style and the museum curatorial experiences and the whole 9 yards. Mrs. Vreeland, this picture you see of Mrs. Vreeland is actually a photograph done later after we become friends when I'm working in a magazine called W, and I've gone up to her house to do a photograph of her for W, and I am styling the picture. The photographer is Jonathan Becker, a dear friend of mine. And so this is an experience of Mrs. Vreeland and I on a Saturday afternoon, rummaging through her couture closet, figuring out how to make a fabulous photograph for W. So there she is in her black Madame Grey, which is her best dress, her best Bulgari necklace, her best Chanel crosses, her best shoes from Rome, Dalco, on her red sofa with a lynx leopard pillow. But this took at least 7 hours of conversation. And the great thing about Mrs. Vreeland was the conversation. Once she stopped going out and she was increasingly becoming blind, one of the greatest joys I ever had in my life was to go to Mrs. Vreeland's house and read out loud to her. I would read entire books to her on the weekends. She said it reminded her of her husband, who in the early days of their marriage, for entertainment, he would read out loud to her. So once Mrs. Vreeland found that I had the voice, the booming voice, to read, she never let go. So I would go up to her apartment for dinner on a Friday night, and it would be just the two of us. And she would make an entrance, even for two people. Madame made an entrance into her salon. She would make a grand entrance, and then we would have a thimble of vodka. We'd go to the dining table, and we would have dinner, and then I'd go onto a little chair next to that sofa and start reading. I read a book called Queen Marie of Romania, a thick book, twice. I read Guy de Rothschild's memoirs twice. I would read magazine articles on, like, I pick up a magazine and I thought, oh, she'll like this. This is an article on Prince, the musician. So I'm reading this article on Prince, and I'm reading, and she's, stop. Get him on the phone. Get him here for dinner next week. And I said, Mrs. Vreeland, I don't know this person. Get him on the phone. He has to come for dinner. And she was a very enthusiastic woman, encouraging. This idea that she was frivolous and that she was superficial is so wrong. Behind this fabulous veneer of rouge is on her temples. You see the red rouge, her lipstick is on here. Her rouge is on her ears. She's taken hours to get dressed. She has a French maid called Yvonne who irons her dollar bills. In those days, we didn't have limousines, so she took a taxi. Her dollar bills were ironed in her Chanel little bag, like yours. Then she would go to a ball or something. She would have a young man come up from the museum, a student, and polish the soles of her shoes. with a rhinoceros horn. Then she would have her clothes laid out. If she was wearing this dress, Yvonne, the French maid, would have pulled that dress out of the closet on Wednesday if she was going to wear it on Saturday. So there was routine, maintenance, polish, discipline, and order to life. The same thing my grandmother had in her life. When I realized that my grandmother, Mrs. Vreeland, was similar, it was one day when my grandmother and I used to take trips to New York or Washington, D.C. to see her sisters to do Easter shopping. My grandmother was not rich, she was not extravagant, she would save money, and once a year, twice a year, we would go up north on a train to buy fabulous clothes. She'd buy me fabulous things and shirts, and she would buy herself a hat, fabulous shoes, and all of this. So she was packing the Samsonite luggage, and she always packed the luggage with layers of tissue paper, layers and layers and layers of tissue paper. We had to go to Woolworths and get layers of tissue paper to pack everything. And this, years later, one day I was in Mrs. Vreeland's house on a Saturday afternoon. We were going to Rome for the collections, and Mrs. Vreeland had about 6 maids. And they were running around, and they were taking the Vuitton cases and packing it with layers and layers and layers of tissue. Whether it's Samsonite or Vuitton, it didn't matter. The ritual of the idea of the order of the suitcase was what was paramount. Mrs. Vreeland, just everything she did was about maintenance, polish, 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 polish. The girls were polishing the wood on the tables. They had to shine. And then I was at home as a young boy, polishing the floor. Polish it, another layer of wax, Johnson's wax, polish, polish, polish. And those things linger, they stay in your mind because those are experiences that you carry with you throughout your entire life. Mrs. Vreeland would say to me, Cleopatra, we had this beautiful gold lame dress from Cleopatra 1939, a Cecil B. DeMille production, black and white, by Adrian. Silk lame, tissue weight. Mrs. Vreeland called me into her office and said, Andre, I want you to go out there now and create a narrative, a picture of Cleopatra in her gold dress. So here's the dress. I have to go and take this dress and make a tableau. Mrs. Vreeland stands up. She never says, go do this. She gives you a narrative in her language and her conversation. So she stands up because she's very theatrical and she's on her toes. And she says to me, Cleopatra, she's only a teenager. She's a teenager. Now, Andre, remember, she's a queen, but she's a teenager. And she lives in Egypt. She's the queen of all of Egypt, but she's just a teenager. And all she wants to do is spend the entire day in her beautiful garden with her white peacocks trailing behind her. Go, get cracking. And this is all new to me. I'm coming from Brown, where I've studied Delacroix. I've done a thesis on the importance of black women in the 19th century French painting and in the poetry of Charles Baudelaire. And I figure, well, this isn't far from being at Brown studying this. What am I supposed to do with this gold lame dress? What can I do? And you just go and you think, and then you take the mannequin, you spray it gold, the same color of the dress. You put the dress on the gold painted mannequin. You have to get permission to paint it. You put it in the eyesight of Mrs. Vreeland. She comes by, she loves it, she stops, and she just exclaims, it's the second coming. So my idea that the gold was a suntan, she loved it. She absolutely thought it was amazing. Then she said one day to me, I need macaroons. I need macaroons. This was another show. I absolutely want macaroons. I want big ones. And I thought, well, I've got to run out now and buy some macaroon cookies. Macaroons was a term for 19th century hairdos a la Jane Austen, when you had pigtails and you wound them around your ears like big earmuffs. So she wanted me to do macaroons, and I had no idea. How do I do this? I was with a friend of mine from Yves Saint Laurent named Betty Catrou, one of Yves Saint Laurent's muses, and we'd gone to Woolworths where she used to buy her t-shirts to go into her Saint Laurent couture suits to break down the elegance of the couture suit. And in the aisles, I discovered hairnets in envelopes. When my grandmother, in the day, she would go to the Five and Dime and buy hairnets, 3 for 25 cents in an envelope. And in Woolworths, I found these hairnets in New York, just like the ones my grandmother had wore, but they had silver in them. So I bought a bunch of these hairnets, went back to the museum, stuffed them with tissue, put the hairnet on the top, and created these macaroons. She sent me back to Woolworths and said, buy the entire stock. So it was always a process of imagination pushes you and fuels you to create your own problem, to resolve your own resolution in the creative world. I've learned so much from Mrs. Vreeland. I owe so much to her. And it wasn't just about luxury, people, enthusiastic, encouraging people, always be positive, see the good side in people, and work. She really, really loved only one thing, and that was to go to work. And here I am with Mr. Andy Warhol in the front, Mr. Frederick Hughes, Peter Lester, who was English, who was the editor of Interview when I got there, and that's skinny me making a face. And to Peter, he said something obviously I disliked. I got to work for Andy because of Mrs. Vreeland. I had walked into the Warhol studios straight out of Brown with my resume, and I wanted to work there, and they saw me. That was in November before I went to work for Mrs. Vreeland. After I worked for Mrs. Vreeland, she told Fred Hughes, the dapper dandy, that Fred Hughes had one thing to do in life, and it was to bring me to the factory to work for Andy Warhol. So one night, I was at a party at Halston. It says, anyone ever know Halston, the famous American designer? Halston was his famous designer. And it was the most glamorous thing to go to Halston's house. Everyone was there. Liza Minnelli, Elizabeth Taylor, Martha Graham, the choreographer, all the models, everyone. If you got an invitation to Halston, it was the invitation. And I'm sort of standing around pretending that I really belong in this atmosphere, which I don't. And Fred Hughes came to me and said, would you please come see us next week at the factory? Mrs. Vreeland says, we have to have you. So I went to the factory and they hired me for $50 a week. $50 a week. I went to work at 12 noon, and at 6 o'clock, life began. Because Andy took you everywhere. He went with entourages of people. So I didn't have to worry about entertainment because I would go to the best screenings, the best parties with the Warhol entourage. But I also got my first big break at Interview magazine, and the first big interview I ever did was with Karl Lagerfeld in May of 1975 in the Plaza Hotel. And Karl Lagerfeld and I became great friends, we still are. And the only reason that we became friends is that I had done my homework and research, which is very vital in anything in life. Do not go anywhere not having researched. People come up to me sometimes, someone the other day from a magazine that I will not name that I'm angry with, Danny knows what it is, the girl sent me a question and said, please tell us about your experience at Vogue with the 80s of Mrs. Vreeland. The girl had not done her research. Mrs. Vreeland left Vogue in the 70s. Anna Wintour was at Vogue in the 80s. So I said back to her an email, please do your research before you ask me a question like that because it makes me think you don't know what you're doing. So I got into Karl Lagerfeld's extraordinary suite at the Plaza Hotel one Sunday afternoon on the arms of Andy Warhol, Fred, and Peter Lester to do an interview with him. And I'd read everything I could about Karl Lagerfeld. I wanted to know who he was. At the end of the interview, there are people having tea in this fabulous suite. Mr. Lagerfeld says, come, darling, come with me a minute. Into his bedroom. And I thought, oh, well. So you'll have to try to be sophisticated if you're not. And I thought, well, what am I supposed to do? Ask him, what do you want with me? So I get up and I go into his bedroom and I stand. And he's in his trunk. And he's taking these extraordinary shirts out of his trunk and throwing them at me. Darling, you need this, take these. I don't want them, take these. And I left with a wardrobe of custom-made shirts and mufflers that he had made for himself, and he probably had never worn them. And that was my uniform for months at Interview magazine. It was incredible. And we became friends, and one of the strengths of our friendship are letters, faxes, words, and books. We love to talk about books and biographies. Back to Vreeland, here I am with Mrs. Vreeland, skinny me. She's instructing me on how to organize this dress, which is a dress of Marlene Dietrich, from a movie called Shanghai Express. I recommend you see it. It's one of the greatest movies ever. The lighting is fabulous. The man who did the lighting got an Oscar for it. It's an incredible movie. She's a courtesan in communist Shanghai. She gets on a train with 2 suitcases. She changes about 20 times into outfits like this. And Mrs. Vreeland thought that this was just fabulous. So working as a volunteer with Mrs. Vreeland, oh, you see the hairnet? You see the hairnet in my hand? Can you see? There's a hairnet in my hand. So she's instructing me, telling me to do something. Here is Mrs. Vreeland at her best. This is the same day when I photographed her on the sofa. And this is a conversation about the boots. The boots are plastic, but they're inspired by Mick Jagger. They're made by Roger Vivier, who was a boîtier, a bootmaker. And I think she was creating an homage to Mick Jagger, which we will get to later, which is a very important influence in my life today. But this, of course, is Saturday afternoon, how to make Mrs. Vreeland look fabulous. And this is a story about her shoes. So she tucks the pants into the trousers and stands in her hall. Now, you may think this is slightly hysterical or caricaturish. This is the ultimate moment of style for Mrs. Vreeland. This is what she lived for. Clothes are a matter of good health. Nancy Mitford said that, one of the great English writers. Nancy Mitford wrote incredible books about the history of Versailles, Frederick of Prussia. You can love clothes and you can still be a very serious person. And that's what Mrs. Vreeland was to me. Everything about this says who she is. The dash, one of her great words was dash. It's got to have dash. You can be slightly imperfect and still be incredibly fabulous. A woman of her age at that time would have been dressed perhaps in a more subdued look. But for Mrs. Vreeland, she would go out like this to lunch or to work. Bravo for Mrs. Vreeland. Here she is on her sofa, photographed by the famous photographer Horst. And this was a formal portrait. I had nothing to do with the portrait, but notice the amount of attention to everything. The dress, the nails, the hair has been dyed beyond dyeing. The dye was imported from Paris. The dye was so intense, the FDA did not approve it for America. The dye on her hair was the thickest black, raven black dye I've ever seen in my life. The pillows, every detail, the coffee table, the baskets, and her attitude on the sofa is very important. And it's an attitude of joy and exuberance, and a frivole at the same time. It's one of my favorite pictures of her. This is me, skinny, coming to New York. Bad clothes, not good. Good clothes. 1989, my first bespoke suit from Huntsman & Co., Savile Row. Good clothes, good look. Crocodile monk strap shoes. I still have that suit. One day, hopefully I'll get thin enough to wear it, or to go to the museum in SCAD. When I got my first Huntsman suit, it was the biggest deal in my entire life to be able to afford a suit from the English Savile Row, which you know stands for the ultimate luxury. I came to London. I had to be introduced to Huntsman. You couldn't just walk in and say, oh, I'm here to have a suit. People had to recommend you. There was a lady named CZ Guest, who was a great socialite in New York. Husband, Mr. Winston F.C. Guest, had his suits made at Huntsman. So she called Huntsman and recommended me. And when I walked through the door, and I said, Mrs. Winston Frederick Churchill Guest has sent me, they were like, what? And I ordered maybe tons of suits and tons of this. And this is a suit inspired by the Duke of Windsor, who was a big inspiration in my life. He had the same plaid suit on in Vogue, and I remembered this, and the plaid was in a boat at Huntsman, so I immediately had to have that suit. And that's one of my favorite pictures. It's been in Vogue many times. By now, I am at Vogue magazine, where I can afford a Huntsman suit. Here's a letter Mrs. Vreeland wrote to me in 1978 in Paris when I was the editor of Women's Wear Daily, the big fashion Bible newspaper. And I had just arrived in Paris in January of 1978. It was one of the greatest years of my life. And she wrote me this letter, and it says basically, I want to tell you that I think your report on the Saint Laurent collection is one of the best pieces of writing on fashion I have ever read, ever underscored. I talked with Eve about it yesterday, meaning as in Saint Laurent. And we both agree that it is a masterpiece of description. All of your pieces, Valentino, Lagerfeld, Lulu's Party, etc., are all very remarkable. Everything is so immediate, gay, and totally clear. Bravo, all the best. Well, this letter, of course, I have kept this letter forever. This letter is enshrined in my house. And this was me in 1978, still under 30, I didn't even want to go to Paris. I was afraid to even go to Paris. And my friends said, you've got to take this opportunity. You've got to go to Paris. You love Paris. You've got to do it. So in January of 1978, I arrived in Paris at the airport cold January night, 13 unmatched pieces of luggage. Today they would be matched if we told them. Then it was whatever I could pack my clothes in. And I was whisked immediately to La Coupole, a famous restaurant where Mr. Lagerfeld patronized, to have dinner with Mr. Lagerfeld and his entourage. And at the other table was the Yves Saint Laurent entourage. And that's how my life began. And that year, Mr. Saint Laurent was doing a collection that had been inspired by Porgy and Bess, you know, the famous Gershwin opera. And my job was to go into Mr. Saint Laurent, interview him, and ask him, how did you come to be inspired by Porgy and Bess? And of course, I knew Eve had never gone to the South. Of course, Porgy and Bess is set in South Carolina, Catfish Row. And I thought, these clothes are so similar to the clothes that I've seen growing up when women in my family went to church. They were gay colors, fabulous hats, and they just had a jauntiness about them. They just exuded the South, black, Porgy and Bess, and chic. So I said, Eve, how did you, what happened? You've never been to the South, and you created this Porgy and Bess look. And he said, I'd simply listened to the music in my Volkswagen going across the bridge from my house to the office, and that's what inspired me. And the collection was fabulous, and it was called the Broadway Collection. The colors were pink, very much like the colors of the Obama girls at the inaugural the other day, those beautiful, fabulous, vibrant colors. And that's how I became great friends with Yves Saint Laurent. I was already friends with Karl Lagerfeld. Lulu had a fabulous party, being the late Lulu de la Falaise. Paloma Picasso got married that year in Karl Lagerfeld's house. So I had to cover the entire wedding of Paloma Picasso. Besides covering her wedding, I had to go with her to Venice. I had to go with her to get the clothes fitted at Yves Saint Laurent. I had to go get my own suits fitted at Valentino because it was a summer wedding. And those were just absolutely 1978 was a banner year for me in terms of my fashion evolution. Again, Madame Vreeland, why do I go back to her? Because she's a pillar of my success as being respected for what I am in fashion. Here is a picture I also styled of Mrs. Vreeland in, I can't remember the year, but it was for one of her shows. And I don't think I was working, I was probably freelancing. And it's done by a famous photographer called Evelyn Hoffa, very serious older lady. And somehow or another, the New York Times had sent me on this shoot to liven up Mrs. Vreeland with Evelyn Hoffa. And notice, this is Mrs. Vreeland's gestures. They're always dramatic, they're always theatrical, but they're always human. There's humanism in the world of Diana Vreeland. There's humanism in everything she did. She lived to help people. She helped so many designers, Yves Saint Laurent, Oscar de la Renta, Bill Blass. She loved people and she loved her work and she was passionate about everything she ever did in life. Here I am in my fabulous red crocodile coat. thin, designed by Miuccia Prada. Here I am playing tennis in the famous movie, the September issue, which is absolutely one of the most hysterical moments in my life. If you think that I play tennis, what happened is Mr. Cutler came to Vogue and invaded Vogue. He's now the best friend with Grace Coddington. And we didn't want to have anything to do with him. When I saw Mr. Cutler, Grace was having the biggest fight on the front row with Chanel before the show started in Paris. Well, you almost knocked me down the other day. You knocked me down. I have a job at Vogue, respect me. And I moved away and I thought, oh, I just moved away. Then Mr. Cutler wanted to film me, so I took him to lunch at L'Avenue and fed him to figure out what he wanted to do. And we became friends. He says, you can do whatever you want, just do whatever you want. So one day he says, I need some footage of you. And I was in California. And he says, doing something different. I said, okay, well, Mr. Wintour wants me to play tennis. Let's go to the tennis courts. Well, that required a whole visit to the Vuitton store for Vuitton accessories. Notice the towel. There were Vuitton water bottles. If you ever saw the movie, someone said that I was drinking water out of a Vuitton water box, which was not a water box. The watch is a $300,000 Piaget diamond watch, a man's watch from 1960 that I borrowed from a jeweler. And I think I did hit the ball 3 times. And that was that. But that's what you do sometimes. Here I am at Valentino's a fabulous farewell dinner in Rome with the great Jennifer Hudson. And Valentino's made me this extraordinary caftan, which I love, to wear to the party when he's saying au revoir, goodbye, after 45 years in fashion. And you know, Jennifer Hudson was a great moment in my life at Vogue because when she was in Dreamgirls, I saw Dreamgirls 10 times. I was so in awe of this person and the power of her voice. The first time I saw it, I went to a screening, someone took me, and it was a screening in a theater in New York. People were standing up like they were at football games. After she sang, they would stomp and applaud like they were at a concert or a football game. So I had to go 9 times because I had to spend 9 times to convince Miss Wintour she should be on the cover. After the 10th time, which was Christmas Day, I said, Anna, I've been 10 times, 10 different experiences, and every time the people go mad when she opens her voice and sings in a movie. So that's how Jennifer Hudson and I became friends, and she had her Vogue cover. Why do I have Marlene Dietrich here? Marlene Dietrich is, to me, the sum total of style, not only for what she wore in movies, but for what she did. She invented herself. Self-invention is very important. Fur hats are very important. You must invent your own diorama, your own persona, based on what your passions are. If you love Chanel bags and black leggings and a little ski jacket, bravo. You have to sit back and think, what is going to make me stand out from the other person? And I'll give you the story of Marlene Dietrich that I read in her biography written by her evil daughter, Maria. Once Dietrich died, the daughter wrote the nastiest book I've ever read that a daughter could write about a mother. But she said, Dietrich was struggling in Berlin to become an actress. She had to go to auditions, stand in lines, tons of actresses. This is the 20s and 30s. And she didn't look that way then, in the 20s. This is all Hollywood, the thin eyebrows and everything. She decided, well, what do I do to stand out from all the other women in the line? She got herself a pair of silk stockings with a ladder up the back. And she had a little pet dog on a lead. And she stood in the line with the pet dog yapping and the silk stockings. She got to the front of the line. She got the part. That's how she started on the road. You know, she had many mentors, directors, von Sternberg. She lost weight. She has this androgynous look, but she was always shopping. When she died, there's a museum in Berlin. They have an inventory of her clothes. She went to every dressmaker in Paris. She shopped at Neiman Marcus for cowboy boots. She wore her husband's suits made in Austria. She had them copied for her. She also was a great housefrau. She loved nothing more than getting in the kitchen and cooking a good pot-au-feu. She also loved to wash the dishes, clean, and scrub the floors. That was her German housefrau side. But there is nothing more glamorous than Dietrich. Dietrich's films have inspired me. Shanghai Express, The Scarlet Empress. It's just something about her and the way she propelled herself through Hollywood and at the same time remained true to herself. She was a great romantic. She loved men. She loved to love people. And she loved style. I mean, they have bills. Her bills are at this museum in Berlin. I mean, the bills that she kept every bill from Paris. She had stockings that she never wore. They kept. She had hairpins, boxes of hairpins from World War II, unused. She had things, just extraordinary things. She would take the ribbons from a couturier, a box. You know, you get a box and the ribbon says, say, for instance, Paquin. She would take the ribbons from those boxes and have them made into house slippers, embroidered. The ribbons would be stretched over leather and made into house slippers. Every single thing, every single letter has been kept. And she's a great inspiration because also Miss Dietrich had great legs. And legs are very important. They're the last things to go if you're a woman, probably a man too. I never met Marlene Dietrich, but many of my friends knew her. And this is a photograph that I think is exceptional. Miss Dietrich would take the photographs and she would mark down the imperfections and she would give airbrush instructions to all her photographs. So the reason you see that in life is there is a picture where she has marked down how to get rid of that wrinkle, how to get rid of that spot, that blemish, to get the perfect thing. She died alone. She died alone living in an apartment in Paris. on the street across from the Plaza Athénée, spending hours on the phone in the middle of the night calling people, calling her daughter, really destitute and alone. But what she gave to the world was this sense of great style, and she also did great service in the war. Here she is in my favorite movie, The Shanghai Express, that dress that Mrs. Vreeland had me working on. This is the dress from the original film. Mrs. Vreeland could not find the original dress. When in doubt, fake it. So she had Oscar de la Renta make the dress, copy the dress, and we sort of recreated that look. But this is her on a train, and she's a hooker. On a train with another hooker in a cabin, and she's dressed like she's going to dinner at the Ritz in Paris. I think it's incredible. That's Hollywood for you. It gives you dreams. Why do I have Dietrich here? Because of Bianca Jagger. The Jaggers are very important to me. This is Mrs. Mick Jagger, the first Mrs. Jagger. And she's got a dead cockatoo on her side of her hat. It does not really matter. The chic of the veil, the chic of the look, the attitude of Bianca Jagger in her youth was equal to Marlene Dietrich. The first time I saw Bianca Jagger come into an Yves Saint Laurent couture show, my mouth dropped to the floor. It was the moment I was waiting for forever. She was, of course, the last one to come into the show. She was fashionably late. They were holding the show up for her. She came in this cyclamen pink suit, black stockings with a ladder up her leg, and a walking stick. Everyone was seated in his seat, all the couture clients. Mrs. Jagger came down the front row and took her seat, and the show began. She exudes style today. If you speak to Mrs. Jagger, she doesn't like to talk about the days of style. She's all about causes and green, Amnesty International. I see her often in summer in Salzburg, and we go to the open air market to buy sunflowers for the house we are guests in, and she's, eating properly and everything. But in the day of Bianca Jagger, there was nothing like it. Everyone lived for an entrance of Bianca Jagger. Once at interview, Andy and Fred sent me up. The Rolling Stones were on concert at Madison Square Garden, and they sent me up to the Pierre to get Mrs. Jagger to go to a photo shoot. And I walked into the suite, and she makes us sleep. And she says, just go in my wardrobe and bring me out all my suitcases, and we'll pack them. And so I went into the wardrobe, and I saw these extraordinary long suitcases of Vuitton. I said, Bianca, I've never seen a suitcase this long at Vuitton. I mean, did you order them? Did you make them? She says, they are gun cases. I buy the gun cases, so when I have my evening gowns, my Zandra Rhodes dress, all I have to do is just put it in this case like a coffin, one on top of the other, and they don't fold, and they come out, and I have to press them. The next time I see Bianca, which is maybe 8 years later, I'm at the Carlisle Hotel, and there's a party going on, and I've gone to pick her up with a group of friends. And Bianca is sitting on the side of her bed pressing her Valentino couture clothes. This is 10:30 at night, and she is ironing her own Valentino crepe de chine jumpsuit, bloomers. I was so impressed with that. We are friends, and we spent many an hour a night on the dance floor at Studio 54. Infinity, she is an incredible dancer. She was. She doesn't dance anymore because now she's Mrs. Jagger, and she's very serious. So she would not like that part of her life to be told as when we spent, 8 hours at Dior, and she ordered 12 couture suits. That she pretends doesn't exist. The suits are in storage. Here is the picture that I lived with at Brown that for me was the ultimate photographer's style. And this fueled all my imagination about when can I get to meet Bianca Jagger? Because here she is with Yves Saint Laurent, that's Yves Saint Laurent, the great designer, with his hand like this. Mrs. Jagger, at the Vogue ball in Venice, this extraordinary ball, Mrs. Jagger obviously has made an impact. Here she is with an old hat, probably vintage, her walking stick, a little simple, ready-to-wear dress. It's absolutely what we call dope. Dope in America means it's amazing. And she just, to me, I had this picture on my wall because I thought, this is where I want to be. I want to know these people. And I finally got to meet them. And Bianca was that person. By the way, Truman Capote did an extraordinary story on the Rolling Stones tour, once for Rolling Stone, the magazine, and Bianca was wearing that dress. And he wrote an extraordinary story about her and how incredible and what an impact she had on style. Here I am dancing with Diana Ross at Studio 54. Why do I show you this picture? To let you know you can have fun. Go out and dance your life up and out into the stratosphere. Studio 54 was one of the greatest events ever in life. It will never be a game. When Steve Rubell opened Studio 54, I was there at least 5 nights a week. And it was amazing. Everyone had to drop by Studio 54 at the end of dinner. You just went there, and you didn't leave until 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm proud to say, someone sent me that picture recently, and there's Diana Ross in some couture dress, probably Yves Saint Laurent, and that's me dancing with her. Isn't that fabulous? Say it's fabulous. It's fabulous. Here's Mrs. Bianca coming into Studio 54 on a white horse. It's her birthday. Now, she would not like to think that I'm at Oxford showing this picture, and she's been dressed by Halston, who's made this red dress for her, and she's come into 54 on a horse. Those were the great days of 54. It was amazing. Theme parties, Trudeau, what was Prime Minister Trudeau from Canada, Liza Minnelli, Betty Ford. You just, everyone, Truman Capote, Marlon Brando, you turn, it was just chock-a-block full of stars. She was a great muse to 54, to Steve Rubell, and she was a great muse to Halston, this designer that I was telling you about. And again, in that period when she was obsessed with her clothes, it was like Dietrich. Bianca could spend hours just ordering shoes from Manolo Blahnik and then putting them in their cases and putting them in storage. Mrs. Vreeland and I used to spend hours talking about espadrilles. I remember once we had a conversation for 4 hours about the perfect espadrille from France. Why did we have to have that conversation? But we had it, and we both weren't wearing espadrille. But it was just, that's unfortunately cropped the wrong way. This is the Vogue, this is my life in early Vogue. This is Iman. Iman came to Vogue and said, I'm retiring from fashion. I don't want to model anymore. And Anna said, well, we must do a story on your retirement. And Anna's idea, of course, was to book Mr. Helmut Newton, the late, great Mr. Newton. I was living in Paris at the time, go off to south of France, go into Karl Lagerfeld's house with Iman, and take this extraordinary set of pictures that were shown in Vogue. Here is Iman in a pair of gold Saint Laurent boots, lame boots, and nude. It's the last time she ever posed nude in life, and Mr. Newton's state has these pictures. The reason that, I don't know why they cropped it, the importance of this picture is we are showing high and low, which we did, we were one of the first magazines to show. You can mix couture with very inexpensive clothes. So those are Iman's jeans. On her feet are crocodile Manolos, and that jacket is a Chanel couture jacket, priceless. So it's the way we thought people should dress. It's one of my favorite things I've ever done. Here is a shoot that I did at Vanity Fair. I'm very proud of this shoot, and it was critically acclaimed in the New York Times. They did a whole page on this shoot. It just came to me one day, let's do Gone with the Wind. Graydon Carter says, let's do something. So I said, well, let's do Gone with the Wind. The blacks will be the whites, and the whites will be the blacks. The black folk will be the rich people, and the white people will be the poor people. And Graydon Carter said, that's a fabulous idea. And Karl Lagerfeld took the pictures. This was one of the most extraordinary things we ever did. Here's Naomi Campbell as Scarlett O'Hara, and this man is a model, and he's playing Rhett Butler. And you know, there's a scene, if you've ever seen Gone with the Wind, he picks her up like that. This was a riot. We had the best time. This is the late Gianfranco Ferré, who's playing Hattie McDaniels, the maid. And this is a scene from Gone with the Wind. Mr. Ferré came from Milan with his apron, custom-made piqué apron. To even suggest that he would do this, I thought he'll say no. But the trust he had in me and Karl Lagerfeld, this is the picture. It's one of my favorite pictures ever. Here is Mr. Ferré being Hattie. You know, there's a scene where Hattie McDaniels is talking to Rhett, and it was a big, big thing. This is John Galliano being a housemaid in Karl Lagerfeld's house, which looks like Tara. Here is Naomi, you know, being nasty to one of her servants, who happens to be a white boy. And she's got, you know, some extraordinary Bulgari necklace that's in a vault, and she's getting dressed. It was a very successful shoot. That's here, look at all the silver, the details, the silverware on the table. We had to go to Karl's house to do this, because to create that in Paris, it would have cost a fortune to rent. So it just scenes, and look at poor John carrying the silver tray over the shoulder, being abused verbally by Naomi. And it's all a visual narrative, and I think it's a very wonderful thing. Nowadays, we can't do this sort of thing because it would be called politically incorrect. Here is Naomi as the great Scarlett O'Hara when Brett forces her to go to the party in a red velvet dress. And this is a dress Mr. Lagerfeld designed that cost $200,000. And it was inspired by a ceremonial mace, an antique ceremonial mace that a friend of his had given him for Christmas. And he loved that mace so much, he created this dress. So that's Naomi playing Scarlett, and I think she looks every bit to Scarlett. This is the great shoemaker and my fabulous, 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 fabulous friend, Manola Blahnik, playing a gardener. And, you know, that's something he wouldn't do. People came over from London, people stayed for days to shoot this story with us, and it was great. Here's Naomi in an extraordinary dress by John Galliano, and look at the volume of the dress. If anyone was the first supermodel, it was Scarlett O'Hara. It's one of my favorites. Oh, we're going fast here. Can you imagine how skinny I was? This is a fabulous philanthropist. Her name is Ann Bass. Ann Bass comes from Fort Worth, Texas, or someplace down there. And lots of money. Lots of money. Lots and lots and lots of money. Collects fabulous art, Rodins, Balthus's, known for her gardens, known for her couture. That's the Saint Laurent couture jacket that she probably spent a fortune on, of the many she has. And we're somewhere in Paris going to an extraordinary black tie dinner. Don't you love my shoes? Manola Blahnik. One of my favorite moments, Oprah Winfrey's Legends Ball. In 2005, Oprah Winfrey gave a ball called the Legends Ball. And I got to go to this ball. Can you imagine having that picture and having the wherewithal to get that photograph taken at the ball, before the ball? And it was to honor black women, excuse me. And I had gone to Chicago to do something on her show, and she took me to the office and said, "Are you coming to my ball?" I said, "I don't have an invitation to the ball." She says, "You're coming to the ball and you're wearing white tie." So I got my act together. And it was one of the great moments. And I love, love, love this picture. You see, I can dress up very well. This is a friend of mine called Gloria von Thun in Texas, who's a great friend of mine. She is German born. She married a very, very wealthy prince with a big, big, big house, bigger than Buckingham Palace. In the 80s, when she was wed to him, she was known as TNT, the Punk Princess. Can you imagine going to a party in New York and having the hairdresser do that to your hair? Today, Gloria is very pious. She goes to the Vatican for private masses with the Pope. The Pope's brother comes to her house for dinner. We go to the Salzburg Music Festival in August in Austria. We sometimes go to the Bayreuth Festival. And I spent Christmas at her beautiful palace in Regensburg, Germany. I show this picture because even though Gloria was the most outrageous personality in her youth, today she's a very, very close friend. She's a wonderful mother, and she's a very, very profound person. But she looks sad and forlorn there. I don't know why, but I think it's the top heaviness of all the hairdo and the way, and that jewelry. And all the jewelry is real, but she's just a great friend, but a great style. Here I am with her, and we're going to the 200th anniversary of my church, the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem in New York City. And Gloria says, "Well, I would love to go to this party." And it was a very important party, and it was white tie, so I got to wear my white tie again. And that's Gloria and I. And notice now how the hair is very normal, and it's very, I think, natural. Here I am in a fabulous couture Valentino caftan that he made for me, swanning into something regal, like this thing. You know, clothes are very important. I don't even know where that is now. I don't even know what drawer, what room it is in. I don't know where the necklace is, but I've kept it. But you know, that was a moment of joy. A great thing with clothes like that is it's a joyful moment, because the designer, when he wants to make you something, he is so happy he can make you something. I mean, Karl Lagerfeld is so happy when Anna Wintour orders dresses from Chanel. It just it validates who they are. And the Valentino, this was vintage fabric that they had found in the Valentino archives. And they pulled it out for me and they said, "We should make you this." And I think it's quite beautiful. I just love that. I show you this picture of Naomi Sims because she was the first black supermodel before any supermodel. Also in my room, growing up in my grandmother's house, I had 2 copies of this Life magazine cover, side by side on the wall. because Naomi Sims was the first true international super black model. She was a great beauty. She was a wonderful person. And she was in Vogue a lot. I got to know her. She was at the Legends Ball. The last time I saw her was at the Legends Ball. It was 2005. And we exchanged numbers. I spoke to her from my room to her room. She says, "You've got to call me." She lived in New Jersey. And I didn't know she even thought about me. And then she passed away from cancer. And I thought I should go to her funeral. It was on a midday morning in New York. And I went to the funeral by myself just to pay my respects. And it was in St. Ignatius Loyola, the same church where Mrs. Kennedy was eulogized. And I go into the church, and her ex-husband says to me, "Oh, you're Andre, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Would you please read from us a scripture for Naomi?" And I said, "Well, of course I'd be happy to." I never expected that. Then I sat down in the pew and read the obituary notes. And in her obituary notes, she had mentioned me and how important I was to her in her life. And I didn't know what to do. I just couldn't contain myself. And I thought, how could I have missed that? But apparently, I often said in interviews that Naomi Sims was very important to me because she represented the best of blackness when I was growing up, and she was the first top model. And she actually looked that way, and designers loved her, and she was a beautiful woman, and I was very touched, even in death, that she had in her obituary these words about me, my name, and how important it was to Andre Leon Talley. And I just include that because I grew up with that picture. Here I am on a fashion show wearing a boring Armani suit with one of my great friends, Venus Williams, who I adore. And we talk fashion, we go to parties together. I've shopped with her, I've shopped with the sisters. One of the things people love to do with me is go shopping. Women love to go shopping with me because they know I will not steer them wrong. I've gone shopping with Venus, I've gone shopping with Serena at Prada, I've gone shopping with Ann Bass. People love my opinion. I often go shopping with Anna Wintour when she has to pick her important dresses. And that means, what about it? And if I say yes, then she orders it. Pageantry is even important at a funeral. This is a Chanel haute couture cape. Of the many that I have, I've been blessed. Karl has made me very extraordinary clothes. Isabella Blow, as you all know, committed suicide. Isabella Blow had been my assistant at Vogue. First, she was Anna Wintour's assistant. Then one day she walked into my office and says, "I've decided I'm gonna come work for you." I said, "Yes, Isabella, of course." And of course, Anna allowed her to come. And Isabella was extraordinary. She discovered Alexander McQueen, Philip Tracy. She was extraordinary, extraordinary, original. She was full of demons, but she had such a big heart. So when it came time for her funeral in Gloucestershire, in some big cathedral, 17 years before her death, I had gone to her wedding in the same cathedral. And it was a big thing. And Manolo had made the shoes. She had a velvet dress inspired by medieval times. And I thought Isabella would want me to wear this cape to the funeral. And the pageantry of this cape, I thought, well, some people are going to think it's over the top, but I'm doing this for Isabella. Well, I have never been to a funeral with so much pageantry in my life. It was as if I was living in a Edwardian era. The funeral was 3 hours long. There were people writing odes. The incense, the flowers were black. The hymns, everything about it was so befitting Isabella's departing life. And I really adored her. And the last thing I saw was a black 19th century carriage taking her away with black horses with white plumes. And I said, I don't want to go to the house, I don't want to go to the reception, that's it. I don't want to see anything else, that's it. And I showed that because I don't look happy there, but the cape was appropriate for that. So this cape is at the Met. Every year Anna Wintour has the Met Ball. This is a Balenciaga cape. Someone called this my house coat. Here I am, one of my best friends, Diana van Furstenberg, who is a great designer and a very close friend. I'm wearing a caftan of hers in a butterfly print. We have known each other since 1975, Studio 54. We used to crawl into 54 and crawl out of 54 and get in her Mercedes and go to a country house and sleep for 2 days on the weekend. She's a wonderful philanthropist, she's a wonderful mother, and she's a great designer, and she has a great career, and I love her dearly. And she has also been a recipient of the Leon Talley Lifetime Achievement Award at SCAD, which is given every year, thanks to President Wallace, and she has also given a commencement address at SCAD. So she's very much part of the SCAD life. Here we are at the first inaugural. Not last week, the one 4 years ago. So, what do we do? I said, you take every fur, every jewel, every bracelet, you take everything you ever thought was fabulous in your wardrobe, put it in a suitcase, and I will too, for 3 days. And we go to the inaugural. And here we are going to some extraordinary party where I have a coat with fake diamonds. And it was just a great shining moment, and that was a moment that I really am happy. I lived with Diana von Furstenberg. We were at the inaugural. At the day of the swearing in, we were in seats 77 and 78. And I said, Dion, we have the good seats. And we did. And that we were very lucky. This year, I had seats 357 and 358, and I stayed home. Here I am with the Empress, Madame Wintour. Sometimes we both wear glasses. Hers are really prescription glasses. I rarely wear these glasses these days. But underneath this veneer of foi de, people are working. Anna Wintour is an exceptional person, an exceptional editor. What she's done with the world of fashion has made it her own with Fashion's Night Out, with the Metropolitan Museum. She's raised over $100 million with the Met Ball since she took over the Metropolitan Museum. And she has done Seventh on Sale. She has taken people's careers and turned them around like that. She has Mr. John Galliano at the present, you know, who had terrible scandal. Mr. Galliano, she has gotten him a job as in residence with Oscar de la Renta. So maybe John Galliano will be the successor to Mr. de la Renta. And she single-handedly took John Galliano, talked to him, kept in touch with him, and came up with that idea, which is for John a great, great moment. Anna is extraordinary. I was supposed to come here yesterday, but I had to have a meeting with her. I had to stay in. We're going to end, and then you can have questions. Here is Lady Gaga in one of the greatest moments of my life last year, looking like a little Shetland pony, dancing on stage with Mick Jagger, back to the Jaggers. This is Mick Jagger's final concert in the 50-year anniversary concert tour in Newark, New Jersey, on a Saturday night, December 15th. His girlfriend, Lorraine Scott, calls me. You've got to come, you've got to come. No, I don't want to come, you've got to come. Get in the car, no. Get in the car, come, no. I have other things to do. I have to go to a cocktail party for Christmas, no. You're going to miss, no, come, oh, come. So you give in. Well, after so many you've got to's, you have to give in. So I arrive in Newark, New Jersey. You've got to be here before 8:40 or you're going to miss everything. And she has arranged for my car. When I have my car literally goes into the dressing room. It's not in the dressing room, but I get out of the door and I'm in Mick Jagger's dressing room. So I said, okay, this works. There is Lady Gaga running around before she's doing this. She's running around, you know, those high heels with all that hair. And I thought, oh, there's Bruce Springsteen, Chris Rock, just incredible people, Johnny Depp, Rachel Feinstein, a great artist friend of mine. Everybody was there. And this concert was amazing because Mick Jagger, to me, is the male equivalent of Marlene Dietrich. He's 69 years old, and he moves like a dandelion in the wind. I was thunderstruck. The stage was enormous. For 2 hours, 2.5 hours, with very little intermission, Mick Jagger never left that stage. It was one of the most amazing things I have ever seen. And the last time I'd been to a Mick Jagger concert was in the 70s, when I went to pick up Bianca with the suitcases. But to see a man at 69, Sir Mick Jagger, at the top of his game, with these shoes, just a dandelion, the dancing, the discipline, the dedication to his craft is amazing. And what he gives to people, the power of his gift in his music and his concert, a stadium full of people. It's just amazing what you can do if you have a vision, if you have something that you can give and share with people. It touches people's lives. And it really touched me. And I must say, whoever this photographer is did a genius job. Because look, there's two Micks and there's two, it's double exposed. And this Lady Gaga and Mick singing Give Me Shelter was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my entire life. I saw her backstage warming up, and it was amazing just to see her warm up. Just natural, no pretense, nobody around her, just getting into the mood of the music. I thought, this is the most amazing thing. I end with this slide, and now we're going straight into Q&A, because I think you probably want to ask me some questions, to show you that no matter what you are, what you do in life, if you have a dream, pursue your dream, stick to your goal, even in Oxford, and just be you, be what you are, and be original, and someone will relate to it, respond to it, and it will take you very far in your life. Thank you for listening. I hope you weren't too bored.